This is David Atkinson, your host of Cymatic Conversations, here for another episode. And we have the pleasure of hosting Jane Threes. She goes by Jane333 on Substack. And Jane caught my attention here about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, because of her affinity for salt and being resilient. Part of being resilient is all about making sure that you're doing the right thing with salt. And it's critical to the human physiology and being resilient. And welcome, Jane, to the show. Glad to have you on and look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you very much, Dave, for having me. It's a pleasure. It's my first interview, so I'm a little bit nervous. So I hope I can give the information that you're after and
Yeah,
have a lovely
no
conversation with
worries.
you.
Yeah, no worries. And been looking forward to this. And can you share with our audience, a little bit about your background and your story, and just kind of kick things off here, and how you became, so fascinated with salt, and was it professional, was it personal? Tell us your story.
Well, I've always been interested in health, and I studied homeopathy when I was in my early 20s, and then left it. And it wasn't until I had children that I picked it up again, just for my own, for my children. Um, And yeah, I ended up having a special needs daughter. So again, the whole focus of health came back to me, and I spent quite a few years just researching, trying to find anything that might help her. And nutrition, of course, is the thing that is going to give me the most result. So that was my focus. And I was also looking at mums with autistic children and how they were using nutrition. So that was sort of in the back of my mind as well. And then we moved to Brisbane from Sydney. And Brisbane in the middle of summer is very, very hot. And prior to this, my idea of hydration was water, and that was it. And didn't think anything of it, and was quite convinced that that was the state because, from my childhood, from my early teens, salt is bad was the mantra. And I was totally invested in that idea. But I came to Brisbane and I drank water all day. I was out in the garden, out in the heat, and I'd come in and I was just feel just as dehydrated as in the beginning, and I just couldn't believe it. And so then I started looking at what am I missing? I'm missing something here, and that's when I came across salt, and it was just at the yeah. So I started experimenting with it basically for a few years, not completely convinced, but just like experimenting, thinking about it, and just trying to think what else happened. Yeah, so I just decided, okay, well, I came across the salt fix, that's right, and with James Stone, Nicole Antonio, and that's when it came home to me. I went, oh my goodness, of course this makes sense. The key thing for me was with the heart was when you have low blood pressure, your heart has to increase the beat. And so therefore you get a very fast pulse to compensate for low blood pressure. And I realised that I've been suffering from dehydration most of my life. And then I just started studying it. And yeah, and so my writings were probably a result of looking at salt quite closely for about 2 or 3 years before I put it into writing.
Fascinating. And
Oh,
I mentioned that I have an affinity for salt as well. And on so there's a section on our Substack called The Resilient Path. And myself and co-author Nicole Connor wrote and created something called the Resiliency Code. And the Resiliency Code, there's 8 characteristics that are fundamental to personal resiliency. If you're missing one of them, you're not resilient, right? And you have something we call blind spots that you must identify, fix, and then make some micro adjustments like you did in your life, Jane. You figured out that, hey, I got a blind spot. What am I missing? And the missing part was, the salt and the importance of that in your physiology and rehydration and just the mechanics of your body. And so the resilient path is a section on Substack where we chronicle and document our practical real life experiences in embodying and using the resiliency code. And I'm getting ready to publish the first large publication in the Resilient Path series. And it's a hitchhiker's guide to being resilient. And ironically, and thank you very much for that brief intro and helping us understand a little more about you. In that book, the the first and second meaningful chapters in the book are water and salt. That's how much of a priority they are. And in the book, there
Mhm.
are general things after that are in general priority, like food and shelter and all the Maslow type of stuff. But at the end of the day, I came to understand the significance of salt. And there was a fascinating story that I read one time. And I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but fascinating story about it was after World War II. And it was some explorers that were doing some work on the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is a peninsula north of Japan, just off the Russian coast. It's Russian territory. Have you
Mhm.
ever heard this story, Jane?
No, I haven't heard it. No.
So there's these explorers, and Kamchatka is more or less, deserted. It's no man's land. Very harsh winters and just a harsh, climate in general. So very difficult to survive. Well, these explorers went to the Kamchatka Peninsula and they're doing some wildlife documentation and observation. And they stumbled across a family, and I can't remember if it was a family of four or five or how many it was. Father, a mother, and some children. And
Mhm.
the explorers are like, we did not expect to find people here, right? They're expected to just find wildlife. And so they approach the family cautiously, of course. They don't know who they are. And they approach the family. And do you want to know what the father, do you want to know what the man asked them for? The first thing that he said, the words that came out of his mouth when the explorers and researchers walked up to him, what was the first thing that this father asked them?
Well, I imagine it's salt.
He simply said, "Do you have any salt?"
Wow.
Profound. That was a moment that really got me thinking. I'm like, wow, here. And so it turns out after the explorers talked to the man and his family, it turns out they were refugees from the war. And what they did
Wow.
was they escaped to Kamchatka to get away from the gulags and everything else post World War II. And this is like the mid 50s, early 60s, something like that, when these explorers found the family. So they had survived out there decades. But what
Wow.
what the family what the family came to understand was the importance of salt for life. When just
Yeah.
living off the land in general, the importance of salt. You
Yeah.
think about I think about salt when it comes to wildlife and such. You think about how a block of salt is like a magnet for wildlife, whether it's like deer or whatever it might be. Just salt in nature is like a magnet. And
Yeah.
so it's been just fascinating. And then of course you've got the entire rabbit hole of all the different types of salt and different places that they come from. Uh,
Mhm.
I learned early on that there's absolutely different types and qualities of salt, and it's not so much the salt and the sodium, as far as what I've come to understand. And I'd like to talk to you about this a little bit. It's not so much the sodium that's important, although the sodium is extremely important, quality sodium, because more or less your body's like a battery, right? So you're managing the chemistry of your battery as far as the liquid in your body. And as far as your epigenetic and your other natural processes in your body. And what I came to understand was all the different types of salt around the world. My favorite happens to be Celtic salt. That's the one that my body responds to very, very well. I consume, a decent amount of Celtic salt, probably, a couple tablespoons or teaspoons a day.
That's
Um,
so tablespoons.
yeah, not tablespoons, no, teaspoons.
Teaspoons.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just a pinch here, like on an avocado or, I actually, if I'm out, like you were, working in hot weather, because I live in the southeastern United States, and June, July, August are brutal here.
Mhm.
And I'll take a large glass of water, 16 ounces, and I'll throw a pinch of Celtic salt in there. And believe it or not, I don't like drinking cold water. And I've
Mhm.
grown an affinity for just room temperature or even slightly warm water. And the salt, of course, dissolves very nicely in that. And I'll drink that. And boy, that's the best rehydration that I've ever experienced. Far better than like a Gatorade Rush or something like that. So I've personally, as I've been traveling down my own resilient path, I've been personally experiencing and realizing the natural benefits of it and the importance of it. And of course, I stumble across folks like yourself on Substack that have additional personal experiences with salt. And it's been fascinating. I came to understand Celtic salt has one of the highest diverse micronutrient contents. There's over like 80 micronutrients in Celtic salt, and that those micronutrients dictate a lot of the benefit to your body. Himalayans, I can't remember how many Himalayans got, like 40 or something like that. But are you familiar with those differences? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Look, I use a high magnesium salt to add to my drinking water, and I use just a dry salt for my food because I can sprinkle it. And when I've run out of my higher magnesium salt, I just don't feel as hydrated. I had a full electrolyte salt from the same place, and I just didn't. It had more potassium in it. I just felt that the magnesium was a better fit for me. So I say to people, there's a lot of salt out there. Experiment, like go out there and see which one works for you. But I also say, any salt's better than no salt. So if I was in a place where I couldn't get the salt that I use, I would just pick up a table salt and put up with the anti-caking agents. Even if it had anti-caking agents in it, I'd still use it rather than have nothing.
Right.
Just because I just know how important it is. But if we can be fussy about salt, then I say, go out there and have a look and see, and like you say, try it on and just see how your body responds, because we are our own experiment when we're putting anything into our body. If we just make one change and then notice, that's the way we can experiment with ourselves and our children as well. I noticed with so my latest thing that I found over the last, say, 6 months is that women need more salt than men. And I noticed that my daughters and I will take the salt with not a problem. Like we just drink it, we don't complain or anything. But my husband was really like pushing back against having it. So I was like going, no, you've got to have your salt, got to have your salt. And then I went, well, maybe he doesn't need as much, like because he's built differently. And then I, thought about it and did some more research. And women have dementia, for instance, at twice the rates of men. And that's when I went, oh my goodness, I think I'm onto something. I think because we're built to carry more fluid, we actually need more salt than men. And I think that's one of the key things, because if you look at dementia research, they just say it's, because women live longer. And I just think that's ridiculous. I think there's a better reason for why women are entering
It's
it
hogwash.
and dementia, losing their minds. And the other thing is that because we need more salt, we're more likely to become unpredictable. You know how PMS and there's all sorts of things where women sort of like become a little bit unreasonable at times, I suppose, where we're normally quite reasonable, and you kind of go, oh, what did I say? And I noticed that with my daughter when she went through puberty. I went, where did my little, sweet natured
Where'd she
girl
go?
go?
Yeah.
Where did she go? And then she'd be fine. I go, well, hang on, what happened just then? And then I realised, oh, it's just before menstruation. She would become a little bit more emotional and more touchy and stuff. And I went, oh my goodness, I think this whole sense of sanity is linked to salt. and women are more susceptible to being dehydrated in that way. And so I think because women usually look after the house and look after the family's health, playing into the propaganda of like, salt's bad for you, women took the salt off the table and
Yeah.
guarded their family against, bad health.
Yes.
And yet we're probably the ones that are the most disadvantaged from buying that propaganda. And because it's so fundamental with so many different areas, that's where I kind of think, oh my goodness. But it was just noticing what happened to my family, like just seeing my husband push back a bit. And I kind of had to go, well, maybe he's saying, I have to notice something here. Rather than pushing him just to keep on having salt because I think he should, I needed to listen and then think about, there might be a difference here. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not easy. One of the hardest things that I found in in embracing and embodying the resiliency code is acceptance, right? Not only of yourself, but others, and just allowing
Yeah.
them to be who they are, and being, not so much, I mean, sensitive is a word, but actually just being conscious of it, that's so important. That, hey, it's everybody's life and physiology is
Mhm.
their own. Everybody's unique. So
Yeah.
it's all about how can we effectively collaborate and support each other, et cetera. And
Mhm.
like yourself, yeah, salt is the more I dig and the more I look into things like seed oils and all the different types of medications and whatever it might be. And,
Mhm. Mhm.
a personal example is my mother she's turning 80 this month, and she
Mhm.
she lives with my wife and I. My dad passed away in 2017, and so she requires care. She's got a disability, and she immediately came under our care, and we've been looking after
Mhm.
her. She never had COVID,
Right.
and she doesn't, knock on wood, she doesn't get sick. And
Mhm.
it's funny, I recently took her to a doctor's appointment because she does have some medications.
Yeah.
And it, it it had been several years, and she needed a refill on a particular medication. Well, the prescription required a doctor visit.
Mhm.
So we go to our doctor, a great man, and go to our doctor, and we're sitting there, and and the doctor, he looks over at my mom, and he hadn't seen us in a while. Looks over at my mom, and he says, "You've been cheating on me." And my mom looks at him. What are you talking about? He says, "Well, clearly you've been seeing another doctor because I haven't seen you in 5 years."
Yeah.
And my mom's like, "No, I haven't." And the doctor looks at her, says, "You're feeling good?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm feeling fantastic." And she looks at me because, she and I are talking all the time about doctors and healthcare and whatever. And so I've
Mhm.
set her expectations properly. And so she always looks at me and smiles, and it's priceless. And he literally had to put her in as a new patient because existing patients roll off after 3 years if the doctor hasn't seen
Right.
her. So it was quite entertaining. And I mean, she is a testament in my personal life to really looking after, much like yourself, your daughters and your husband and yourself, looking after and really paying attention to your physiology, and whether it's the medications you're taking or your nutrition, whatever else, it really matters. And my
Mhm.
mom would not have the quality of life that she does if we weren't paying attention to that, and
Yeah.
applying what we know. And so very fortunate, and we're not perfect. We're learning every day. And it's important to allow yourself to make mistakes. And one of the bright spots of the resiliency code is something that the resiliency code flushes out, and it flushes out very quickly. First thing it does is it flushes out inauthentic anything, right?
Mhm.
That's one of the things I love about it, because I'm a very transparent guy. And so it really fosters and flushes out inauthenticity like immediately. And the other thing the resiliency code does is it allows you to quickly identify and quantify blind spots. And these are
Mm.
literal blind spots, things that you just, they're outside of your frame of reference. And I love to use this analogy with people that I talk to and associate with. When I was a kid and my parents sat me down for the first time with a jigsaw puzzle,
Mhm.
what they did was they taught me, they said, okay, son, you find the corners, right? And you build your frame.
Yep.
And that gives you your frame of reference to put the other pieces in.
Yep.
And I've come to understand that our lives are no different. And really, one of the
Mm.
best things that we could ever do in our lives is expand our frame. And
Ah,
take it from a 100-piece puzzle to 1,000 piece and then 10,000 or
yeah.
whatever. And then when we're presented with some weird data point or experience or whatever else, the larger our puzzle has become, the greater a chance that we actually have a large enough frame to know or have a general idea where that puzzle piece fits.
Mm.
I know you,
Or to even know it's part of your picture.
right,
Like,
right.
do you know what I'm like? No, that doesn't fit in my picture, so it's like it's got nothing to do with me.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
But I know you've had conversations because I've certainly had conversations where you're talking with someone and you're talking about them, you introduce a new topic and
Mm.
they like disappear, they like disengage and try to
Mm.
change the subject to sports or I'm talking as a man, but try and change it to another subject that they're comfortable with because it's totally out of their frame of reference. And I've witnessed that so many times in my life because I'm constantly, whether it's not so much challenging the narrative, but challenging the narrative because
Mm. Mm.
we continue to discover that things are not necessarily what they seem. And so it's
Mm.
imperative that we do. And I found that works as a great analogy, the puzzle frame, because especially with the rapid pace of change and AI and all these different billions of data points and everything that were
Mm.
thrown at us in a given year,
Yeah.
it really behooves us to have as big a puzzle frame as possible so that we can grow and we can, figure out those blind spots and really apply what's relevant in our lives. And so that's been a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
so Jane, with that said, are there particular recommendations, things that you've learned and experienced in your life other than what you've shared thus far that our listeners um, can consider doing? As I shared, the resiliency code reveals blind spots. Well, you find and fix those blind spots by making what we call micro adjustments in your life. Not major adjustments because it's never good to make major adjustments. It's much better to fine tune things.
Mm.
And, are there little things that you can recommend? Like in my case, Celtic salt worked great for me. And you had mentioned that salt that's got more magnesium and such in it works great. Any other
Mm.
any other thoughts in terms of your journey and what you've found as you went down this journey with salt? Anything that really sticks out as far as an experience or something that's relevant that our listeners might want to hear?
Well, the my daughter is 16, and basically I have to, when something happens with her health, I have to kind of like work out how to fix it. And the latest thing that happened, she went through puberty, and suddenly she was type 2 diabetic, put on a lot of weight, and we were scratching our heads, going, well, maybe COVID happened at the same time. Maybe it's just because we haven't had school, and she hasn't been as active as she usually would be. But anyway, we took her to the doctor and her bloods were in the diabetic range. So that weekend, we just took all the carbohydrates out that had crept in and went to a low carb diet, and her bloods came straight down. And that's when you kind of go, okay, well, sugar in raises blood sugar, like it's really that simple.
Mhm.
But I also then looked at all the foods that were recommended for diabetics in the natural range, and I realised that they were all high salt. And so that's when I had to go, come on, there's another link with salt here for blood sugar. And yeah, just looking at that connection, that if our adrenaline is pumping all the time because we're dehydrated, and dehydration is an emergency, our adrenals are on to save us. And to do that, they raise cortisol, and then cortisol raises blood sugar. So there you've got the mechanism for cortisol waking someone up in the middle of the night. You've got all the adrenals going at the same time as well. So you've got the anxiety raising. And all of these I can see in my daughter as well. So that's when I realised I had to actually up her salt a lot more than what we had, to try and get her to have to lower her cortisol as well. So it was like that was one of the the big learning curves for me, was just to see how cortisol was linked with salt intake as well. And that's where you and just looking at the adrenals being on all the time. So anytime the adrenals are managing an emergency, all of the hormones are going. So that's when you get the quite profound changes. And so any stress, extreme hot, extreme cold, your body starts to manage these things with increased adrenal management. And salt will help you bring the adrenals down and come back to a hydrated state, and so that you can rest and relax and recoup. So it's a really good way of thinking, if you're under stress, you can feel an adrenal, like maybe you've had too many coffees. You can feel the adrenals ramping up. You go, oh boy, I need to get some salt so that I can start to have that calmness return. And so that's probably one of my biggest things. And also just looking at understanding all the symptoms of dehydration is really important. So learning what they are. So for instance, I wouldn't have necessarily thought that nausea would be a symptom of dehydration. But if you've ever had an experience, I'm sure you haven't, of having too much alcohol, every single symptom of having too much alcohol is a symptom of dehydration. So then you can match those symptoms to other things. So I would say look at morning sickness, look at PMS, look at those sorts of things that match mountain sickness. They're all symptoms of actual dehydration, but they match the symptoms of low salt or dehydration. So that's actually what they are. But we just have different terms for them.
Fascinating. That makes a whole lot of sense. And when I think back on my life, right, all those different experiences, that makes a whole lot of sense. And it's funny, as we continue on this journey, it's the older I get, the simpler things become. We love to overcomplicate things, but the reality is it's actually quite simple. And part of the beauty of it being simple is that there are simple things that you can do and make little changes that, boy, the profound difference in quality of life. And pardon me. So one of the other things that I recently discovered was, because I like coffee, like a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I've radically reduced my sugar intake in coffee, because of the things that part of the things that you describe, and just because I'm really becoming more and more aware of that. And then the other thing that I came to understand is that the caffeine in coffee and energy drinks and tea and other things that have caffeine in them aggressively, like leach or strip the magnesium out of your physiology. And I didn't understand how aggressive it was until recently. And so I've upped my magnesium intake, and boy, does that help in terms of sleep regulation and just a better energetic level and otherwise. So yeah, all these little things matter in a big way.
Well, salt's good for sleep because it helps your muscles relax. So the other things that when you look at the symptoms I call it the wilt symptoms, you've got all of the restlessness, you've got the tics. So you might have little tics going off. You might have cramping. You might just have little spasms. They're all symptoms of your muscles needing salt. And then for you to go to sleep, I always have salt before I go to bed, simply so that my muscles are relaxed and my brain can relax, and I can sleep. And also it lowers cortisol. So cortisol will wake you up in the middle of the night, like about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, if you haven't had enough salt. So it's one of those things that will stop you from sleeping. So I think that a lot of children, I started giving my daughter, because she's been terrible. She's been a terrible sleeper for a lot of years. And I started giving her like a good dose of salt before sleep, and she's sleeping through. And like this is a miracle for me. So I was thinking with your resilient parenting as well, where I see that it's just because I've got a child who's probably functions at about 18 months, and she's 16. So I have to do a lot of self-care for her and managing of her and stuff like that. And she's non-verbal as well. So it's kind of like I have a lot to sort of manage for her life. But yeah, just having her sleep, like she's just a different girl in the morning because she's actually slept. And we've all slept.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So salt to go to sleep. Remember that, guys.
I that's a big one. In fact, so much so that as recently as this morning, because I know it's after 8 o'clock your time in Brisbane, but it's almost 7 a.m. here in southeastern US. And Jane, sure enough, I was up at 1 o'clock this morning.
Oh
And
dear.
when I think back to what I had for dinner, and I always try to eat an early dinner, but I think back to what I had for dinner and what I drank and this, that, and the other thing. And sure enough, our conversation makes total sense. Not that I wasn't aware of it, but one of the things that I enjoy about having these conversations is that it really brings things front of mind and front and center in our awareness. And then we tend to do something about it. So I'm grateful for that. And
Yeah.
we'll make some adjustments here and see if I can sleep a little better.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's fantastic. And so, Jane, the last thing, we're getting close to not quite an hour, but close to an hour here, and we'll start wrapping up here in a minute. But the other thing that really that really comes to mind is the and hold on a second, I gotta get my thought back. It disappeared on me, but I'm sure it'll come back here in a moment. Oh, yes. So can you talk about the micronutrients and such in salt? Are there different places that we can get the salts? Like Australia, I'm sure is sourcing different salt than the US and otherwise. Have you found anything meaningful there? And this is in an effort to provide our listeners, whether they're in the US or in Australia or around the world, you know, are there different places that you can get these different types of salt, or is it just figuring out what works for you, on the store shelves or whatever it might be? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I say look at what's around locally. Look for ancient. We've got an ancient lake over in Western Australia, where I get my salt from. It's hand harvested from a family. So yeah, look around and see. There'll be different sources of salt, and yeah, just see if you can get one that suits you. I'd just buy little packets in the shops, and if you can, or send little samples out and try it out, and then decide whether you want to make a bigger investment. But like there's some really good sea salts out there. Um, but my contention with salt, because I know people want to know what salt, what type is that really it is the sodium and the chlorine, sodium chloride that is the workhouse horse. That's what I say. So the micronutrients are great, but you do have to look after the sodium chloride part, because that is doing the bulk of the work in your body. And we probably, if you look at a blood test, you'll see that all the other elements are not needed in half the amount, like thousands of times less than what sodium chloride is. And I think that a lot of the pushback against salt has been, they've been, saying, well, you need more potassium, you need more magnesium. They've been able to move people away from sodium chloride by saying, well, this is the better salt for you. Whereas in actual fact, we really need sodium chloride. And then the other micronutrients are a benefit. So that's why I would say just find salt and experiment with it, and then get fussy about looking for the special salt, because I think we just need to get salt back, at least salt on your food. And then I would say get a wet salt for putting in your water, because it's much easier to stir in and dissolve into your water and drink. And it's not quite as, I don't think it's quite as salty. So I ended up, I started with a pinch of salt in my water, and then I went to a quarter of a teaspoon. And then, because I was getting used to the idea of salt in my water, because it's not something that I would naturally have gravitated to.
Yeah.
And then I've gone to half a teaspoon of salt in my large glass of water. And I find that I can drink that fine, and so can my girls, without being revolted by it. Like, it's easy. And I think that's where we've got to stay with being gentle, stay with being easy, and just try and do it as many times as you can during the day. When you think about it, just think, oh, I'll have some salt. And I'll, so it's just trying to get as much as you can in the day. But the other thing I say is that there are salt sensitives out there. And so these are people who, so this is my theory, and I haven't done any, I haven't got substantial evidence for it, but this is my thinking, is that when someone is a salt sensitive, our adrenals have two choices. One, they will become exhausted and fatigued, or two, they will get bigger, and they will grow bigger so that they can keep the cortisol, so all of the adrenal cortical hormones pumping out and save your life. So these people are the ones that when you start putting salt back in, they'll get the bounce back, because their body is really sensitive to salt. Any salt that they get, they can use, because their adrenals are supersized. So those are the people that really need to be careful when they start adding salt in. Just do it very gently and very slowly. Whereas the people who are fatigued, like me, my adrenals just got fatigued, and I just got tireder and tireder and tireder. I was able to put salt in and just gradually up it, and I haven't had any ill effects from doing that at all. So that's why I think that there's two types of people, and you'll know if you get a reaction from salt, you're probably being blessed with adrenals that can grow a little bit. And I always say our bodies are really adaptable, so I'm sure when there's a little bit more salt going in, the body will then adapt, and those adrenals will start not having to do so much work, and they'll probably get smaller again, because you've just got an amazing body that's been able to adapt really well. So that's my thinking, is the body is really, really capable, and so it's never going to be hurting you. It's never going to be trying to kill you. Like, that sort of thinking, I think, starts to alienate ourselves from our own ability to heal. Our body is always trying to save our lives. And if you come from that mentality, you can find the way to support it doing that. And I say getting hydrated is the first way to support your body to heal itself. And that's why the saline IV is the number one remedy in hospital, because they know if we get this person hydrated, if their body has got enough fluid in it, it can heal itself. And our body, like, I bought lots of supplements for my daughter over the years, like, this will fix it, maybe this will fix it. And then I went, you know what? God wouldn't have done this to us. Like, our bodies are amazing. Every time I study physiology, I go, our bodies are amazing. There's no way that I would have to buy this supplement and pay all this money and like it's not designed like that. It has to be something simpler.
Simple,
And
simple.
I kind of stamped my foot and I said, our bodies are, you know, like, I know there's a better, I don't need this expensive supplement. There has to be something else. And then when I found it was salt, I just laughed. Do you know what I mean? I
So
just laughed. I
simple.
just went, it was right sitting in front of me all this time. This is the miracle remedy I've been looking for my whole life.
But
It's
Jane,
just like
but Jane, salt is
amazing.
bad. Salt is bad.
Amazing. I know. Like the propaganda gave us this huge blind spot. And it's my go-to. I say to people, look, salt is your first aid kit. You know, my daughter just goes, oh no, Mum, I know salt. I know, Mum, it's salt, I know.
You're training her well.
And I said, it is. And she said, I know. No one likes to be told.
Well,
Yeah, like
I mean,
pretty much everything, every melody she comes to me, I go, I think you need some more salt, hun.
well, think about that. I mean, what life-altering advice as a young child, right?
Yeah,
Then
yeah,
then to understand because of, as we're getting older, you were coming to understand how meaningful these things are. Wow, what valuable advice for our youth. And
yeah.
that's great. And what great experience and great background. Thank you for sharing that. And one other thing I wanted to ask you, Jane, is I'm a huge fan of pickle juice.
All right.
Especially when you've been out working in the sun and you've been sweating and you're dehydrated and you get a muscle cramp or whatever else. They bottle up these little shots of pickle juice here in the States, and I'm sure you have them available there somewhere, where literally in seconds you get relief of the cramp because
Mm-hmm.
I found that it's literally the reaction is that immediate, which tells you that your body is ultra responsive and will fix itself very quickly if you're giving it the right things. And so is it the brine? Is it I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. The muscles love salt, bones love salt. Um, the brain loves salt. Like to be able to think clearly. Like I was going through like in Sydney, and before I found out about salt in Brisbane, I was like forgetting things. I'd be like going to the fridge going, "What did I need?" And honestly, like, it just helps me think. It helps my memory. It helps. My father-in-law is 90, and he's been health conscious all his life, very disciplined with the food he eats and stuff. And but I've been saying to him, we're in Brisbane now. You need to up your salt, but salt's bad, Jane. Yeah, I know, but it's not bad. So, but he's 90. I'm not going to change him. But anyway, he had a tune where he was confused for about 30 minutes. And he said to me, oh, Jane, like I was really confused. I didn't know anything. He was really quite worried. And I said, Jack, it's, you were just low salt, you were dehydrated, and that's what will happen to you. So, and I pointed it out and showed him it's just so important for your thinking ability to be hydrated, and salt will do that for you. And so I was able to like ease his mind that he wasn't going down a steep hill,
He
and
wasn't
it's been fine.
wasn't losing his mind. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because like we live next door, so it's okay. We can keep an eye on him and stuff like that. But he's just amazing for his age. But it's interesting when I looked at his blood test, everything was in the middle of the range except for salt. Salt was just sitting on the bottom, and I said to him, like if you had the salt in the middle rather than just up 5 points, that would give you a little buffer.
Yes.
But so look at your blood test and see if you can get salt into the middle rather than off the bottom end, because
I
it's one of the things that will send elderly people into the danger zone in hospitals. If they arrive to a hospital dehydrated, it's a lot harder to get them. That's probably the one reason why they get there, and then it's their prognosis isn't as good if they keep ending up there dehydrated. But often they're in institutions where they're fed a low salt diet, and then coffee and tea, and so it's really not a great environment. So if you have an elderly person in an old person's home, give them a salt shaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, give them a salt shaker. You go and salt your food.
Yeah. It's oh, that's fascinating, Jane. And so grateful for your time this morning, this evening, your time.
Gotcha.
It's been a fun conversation, and what a pleasure to meet you and speak with you. And again, appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experience with our listeners. And I, if before we end here, I want to say again, so our listeners can reach you on Substack, and your Substack is Jane333. And is there anything else that that you'd like to share with your listeners in terms of how they can reach you, or that's the best way they can kind of kind of ride along and watch your work and watch your experience with Salt? Is that the best way?
Yeah, that's great. I'm responsive if you leave me a message or make a comment. I'm there. I'll reply to you. So, and
Great,
there's like there's lots of comments as well, so you can go through all the comments and read what other people have said and see my responses.
excellent. Well, again, Jane, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure things are going to evolve in the world. Maybe we'll have the opportunity to chat again sometime. Maybe we'll have some other revelation. I'll be sure to stay in touch and just make sure that yeah, as we learn new things on the journey, if there's anything relevant, I'd love to have you on the show at some other point. If it makes sense.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Dave, for having me.
You bet,
I had a
Jane.
lovely experience. Thank you.
Great. You take care, and I'll be chatting with you again soon.
Thank you, Dave. Bye.